Hello and welcome to the Sky Mobile Transfer Show. Back for another episode. We'll be running them throughout the month of August, discussing the latest speculation and deals going on in this crazy, crazy window. I'm delighted to be joined by Nieve. Nieve, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I'm very excited, but also confused about this season.
Okay. Maybe we'll get onto Nieve's confusion during the course of the episode. Mikey McCubbin is back as usual. How are you, Mikey?
I'm all right, Diggs. I'm all right. Yeah. Back in my rightful spot. I took your spot last week to host in your absence, but yeah, I feel.
Well, you did an excellent job.
I feel back at home now.
There's no rightful spots whatsoever. But let's get on to the winners of the transfer window so far, discussing purely winners, no losers on this week's episode, and we'll be coming up with our Sky Mobile Switch of the Week, our favourite completed deals towards the end of the show too. Nieve, let's kick off with your winner of the window so far from the Premier League. Who are you going for?
I'm going to go for West Ham.
Nice.
I don't think they've had enough love shown to them for what they've done, because they started so early in the window because they needed to. Yeah, they were absolutely decimated last season, even going back to January as well. David Moyes letting Ben Rama go, Fornals, Kehrer as well. Their squad just looked so small, and it looked like it had so many weaknesses that needed fixing. And all of a sudden, in the space of, we've not even finished the transfer window, there's now talk about, hang on, that team looks capable of potentially fighting for a European place. Like, it looks amazing. They've pinpointed every single position straight away, and it seems like they've got the first people that they want. But yeah.
Absolutely love it. I mean, let's particularly focus on a couple of players that have come in. They've really gone heavy on the centre-backs with Kilman and Todibo. But who is your best signing from West Ham this window so far?
Yeah, Todibo is an excellent signing, because they needed to make those defensive signings. That's why they've done it. Ogbonna replacement, someone to improve on Zuma, I'd say, and obviously brought Kilman in. Who they're going to bring in next? I wasn't expecting it to be the calibre of Todibo. Manchester United were looking at Todibo not too long ago, so that's a brilliant signing. But even Aaron Wan-Bissaka as well, because all of a sudden you look at Aaron Wan-Bissaka signing, and Sofal's a great player, but it's great that there's a bit of challenge there, and it's not a reliance upon Sofal. It's now someone who might have to fight to get back into that team. Summerville, I'm so impressed with that as a signing.
Yeah, you're a big EFL fan. I mean, you must have seen him lots for Leeds last year. He was sensational.
Yeah, cut above. Obviously him and Archie was another one who really stood out in that team, and there will be a lot of teams that were looking at Summerville, so to be that team to go in and win that signing is really impressive. Yeah,
absolutely massive. And then finally up front, Niklas Fullkrug as well. Not the youngest, he's 31 now, but so much quality. Got Dortmund to a Champions League final last year. Do you think he's the one to end West Ham's sort of striker curse, as they talk about?
Potentially. It's you can't make that call, before a ball's been kicked and seeing it, but it's more that it looks like West Ham actively wanted him. It wasn't who can we get that's available. That, along with the other signings, that's what excites me about these signings. And him and Mikel Antonio's options up top, I think that'll be more than good enough for them.
Love it. And just finally, before we get Mikey's thoughts, I know he's desperate to get involved with West Ham too. But where do you see West Ham finishing this season if you had to get your crystal ball out?
I really rate Lopetegui, really rate him. Personally, now with that team, all of a sudden, I actually think there should be an expectation of top 10. And now it's actually above that slightly. But I think for a manager like Lopetegui, that expectation's far better than coming into a team that are fighting survival, and he's got to do the best he can do with them. So, yeah, I would say actually somewhere around the 8th, 7th region for them.
Oh, it's going to be exciting for sure. I mean, Mikey, we'll discuss your candidate for winner of the window in due course, but West Ham deserve huge props. As Nieve points out, they've been decisive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were quite keen to get West Ham on this show because it feels like, I don't know, it feels like there's a bit of a clamour actually from fans, like in the comments over the last week, to chat about them a bit more, because I think they are finally getting the recognition they deserve, and especially after what's happened in the last week. I think Guido Rodriguez as well, amazing free signing in the midfield, and it is interesting, isn't it? Because they've got Lopetegui in place, and I think I agree, Nieve. I think like 7th, 8th is what they should be aiming for, but then that top 8 is just so competitive now. I think they finished 8 points off Man United in 9th last year, and I think that was also the same kind of points difference that was between West Ham and maybe a 14th, 15th place. So there is a gulf there, and the most of the teams in the top 8 have all strengthened at this point. I guess the other question is Lopetegui's football going to be different enough from Moyes' football to justify these signings? And that was, a huge gripe with the West Ham fans last season was, we've got, the likes of Mohamed Kudus and Jared Bowen in this team. We should be playing more attacking football, and West Ham, really did not play very good football last year, in my opinion. And when you look at the underlying numbers and everything, they were actually quite lucky to be where they were, to get the results that they did. And I think that had a lot to do with how good Jared Bowen was, in terms of his finishing ability, in terms of those individual pieces of quality in the final third. Whereas now they just look so deep, don't they? You've got Summerville is now they've actually got a specialist left winger. Paquetá's not going to have to, play out there. Then you've got the choice of Kudus and Paquetá in the middle. And Fullkrug. I think the big one will be Fullkrug. If Fullkrug can actually take off, then finally they're no longer going to have to be reliant on Antonio. But it is still, I guess that's the one risky signing, because he is 31 years old. He's not actually played that much top flight football in his career. He was kind of been going between the second and first tiers of German football. It's not a cheap amount of money. Dortmund have replaced him with a player 10 years younger than him who outscored him in the Bundesliga last year in Max Bayer from Hoffenheim. So I think there is still a slight concern there, and I feel like there will be a bit of pressure on Lopetegui to play more expansive football than perhaps maybe he's even used to, because we've seen over the years that he's a very pragmatic manager, and has had great success initially with Sevilla with that, and did a great job at Wolves. He's now been given the backing that that he craved before. I think there could be a bit of pressure, because I think in terms of pure incomings, in terms of pure activity, I don't think really anyone comes that close to West Ham, to be honest, in the transfer market, aside from maybe Chelsea. But of course, I don't think we can necessarily have Chelsea as winners just because of their track record over the last 2 years.
Yeah, the amount of chaos there for sure. Before we move on to our next suggestion for winner, Nieve, I wanted to ask you quickly, do you see any big name being a sort of victim of these incomings? Is James Ward-Prowse under pressure for his first 11 spot? Is Nieve Petruzziello now thinking there's so much more competition at the back? Do you see either of those two struggling to be a starter this season?
Yeah, absolutely, both. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I actually think more than ever this season, we saw it a bit last season, squads is going to be paramount. And West Ham have had a small squad for a while. I think that's what David Moyes likes to do, but I don't think you can do that anymore. So I don't particularly think that's a bad thing.
I love it. Strong case there made for West Ham. Mikey, who are you bringing to the table as your winner of the window?
Yeah, it's a really strong. I think it's a really strong start with West Ham. I think it's tough to top them in many ways, but I do think we need to shine a bit of a light on Man United. I think if the Leny Yoro injury hadn't happened, then I think we'd be looking upon Man United's window with a lot more favour. That this United side is still going into the season, a little bit rusty. Not a first 11. That whoever they put out against Fulham on Friday night is not going to be, Ten Hag's number 111. Højlund's still out injured as well. Be interesting to see whether Zirkzee finally gets minutes in this side. He wasn't used in the Community Shield, of course. So it's a funny one where I think United have had a really good transfer window, and I think the signs from this transfer window are really good. It's not necessarily that this transfer window is going to turn Man United into a top 3 club in the Premier League, because I think I still think it's doubtful, and I still think United are not one of the favourites to even make Champions League football this year. But then we're remembering that you have to remember that last year was their worst ever season in the Premier League in terms of both points tally and where they finished. So I think that the signings in general have, I think it's more of a more indicative of where United are going long term. I think especially with the Leny Yoro signing, can't really remember the last time Man United, you kind of won the race for a really prodigious talent. And yes, they probably had to overpay for him a bit, but in the long term, 62 million euros on a player who could be one of the best centre backs in Europe in years to come, may well work out really well. Joshua Zirkzee obviously paying his release clause. I think they needed depth at striker, and they've got that, and they've got a player at a really good age at a really good price there. And then I think what's bumped up the windows has of course been the business in the last week, getting Matthijs de Ligt and Noussair Mazraoui in from Bayern Munich. I think the Mazraoui deal isn't without its faults. Of course Wan-Bissaka going to West Ham as part of that domino effect, and I think Wan-Bissaka clearly is not the right back that Ten Hag wants. His skill set is not suited to a build-up system, not suited to possession football, and I think that will work really, really well. His skill set will work really, really well at West Ham, and I think actually he was fairly underrated at points in his United career. I think he got too much stick at points. Like, his creative numbers were not as bad, as people made out, but his general on-the-ball play wasn't. He wasn't the kind of fullback who you could imagine inverting into midfield. He didn't necessarily overlap with the right winger that much, but then again, United's options on the right haven't been so good in the last few years either. But Mazraoui, I guess the reservation is basically, will he stay fit? I think he's started something like 26 league games over the last 2 years, which isn't an amazing record at Bayern. I know there was obviously a lot of competition, in that right back slot at Bayern anyway, especially with Kimmich dropping back there at points over the last 2 years. But generally speaking, as a footballer, looks like a good fit. Of course, I think he's one of 6 signings who have already played under Ten Hag now over the last 2 years.
Very cheap as well.
Yeah, pretty cheap as well. As was De Ligt. I think that was the coup of the window, really. I think 45 million euros is an absolute steal for someone of De Ligt's stature. And I think, say Liverpool had gone in for De Ligt as a partner for Van Dijk, it would really be being talked about as an amazing signing, which could elevate Liverpool once again in Arne Slot's first season, or at least give Arne Slot a better chance of really making a mark in the Premier League in his first campaign. But I think because it's Man United, and because Man United was so bad defensively last season, and there are question marks over Lisandro Martinez's fitness, and Yoro's already out, and you've still got Lindelof and Maguire floating around, and there's still question marks there, isn't there? Left back slot as well. There's obviously question marks there in terms of Malacia's still out injured. Shaw's picked up another injury as well. Lisandro had to play the Community Shield. So I think because he's coming into a defence which, again, lacking convincing cover in front of them in terms of a central defensive midfielder last year, it does feel like De Ligt is slightly being thrown into the fire. But I guess that the hope is that the kind of tactical outlook that we saw from Ten Hag at the end of last season carries on into this season, rather than the kind of complete chaos that we saw around the kind of February, March, April time. That I think that would be the hope from a United perspective. So I think all they need to do basically is sign a defensive midfielder now, and I think most United fans can be pretty happy with what they've done, especially given the PSR constraints, that they've had to sell a lot of players as well. I think that's another thing. I think this has been United's strongest selling summer, I think, since 2019, when Lukaku left for big money to Inter. So that's been a big thing as well, the club actually showing that they can sell players, and sell them not for under £10 million, which is has been the norm with United in the past.
Very interesting indeed. Nieve, if you had to look at all those signings for Man United, which is the one that which one are you most impressed with, is what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think De Ligt is an impressive signing, just purely on the fact that, like you say, they had to go out and get somebody, and to get someone of that calibre in the position that they're in off the back of finishing 8th last season. Actually, when you think of the expectation of the level you can get, and Leny Yoro as well, in terms of the options that a centre-back like that would have to choose Manchester United, I've been impressed with that, generally speaking, with all of their signings really, is that pull power. I know they're Manchester United, but a lot of players seem to go to Manchester United to collapse, don't they now? So it's the fact that maybe the things that have been happening off the pitch, we don't know what conversations that the club has with these players when signing them. It's a sign that those are positive conversations, and that the new appointments off the field are positive ones. And that, for me, is the thing with Manchester United that has always needed to change. There's always needed to be improvement there. Obviously, Van Nistelrooy's come into the club as well, and I'm actually really impressed with that as well. I think something needed to change there. So I think for the first time in a window with United in years, I can see a bit of direction. I can see a potential identity building, and I think as well now Ten Hag will go into this season and there won't be an excuse of last season how he wanted to play. It would have been really hard to play like that with the players that he had, the defenders that he had to play, having to rely on Johnny Evans with all those games. The midfield didn't really protect that defence at any point. It was really hard to play how he wanted to play, whereas this season they should be able to do that.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. And we talk about midfield there. There's a very good chance that they sign Manuel Ugarte as well. Jorge Mendes, according to reports, is keen to find new homes for João Felix and Ugarte, who is under his tutelage as agent there. I wouldn't be surprised if he came in as well. And then that is a really pretty top window. But we've seen in the past, we've said Chelsea have won windows in the past and not had a good season. It doesn't guarantee anything. But I kind of would Nieve. There's very few excuses after a window like this for Man United. Before we get into ranking the various winners so far, I want to throw another suggestion into the ring with Spurs. I think they've had an excellent window, to be honest. They were 5th last year, but they actually only finished 2 points behind Aston Villa in the end. And whereas Villa have lost Douglas Luiz, who I think is a really pretty crucial player for them. Yes, they've signed Amadou Onana, but he's a very different style of player. And I know Douglas Luiz was slightly fading maybe towards the back end of last year, but I still think that's a huge departure. Spurs have strengthened and haven't lost any key men, let's say. They've actually managed to clear out really effectively lots of those players that didn't have a future under Ange Postecoglou. Perisic left last year, Tanganga, Sessegnon, Ndombele, they've all left on frees. Hill, Højbjerg and Velez have left on loans as well. And then they've got some decent fees as well. Joe Rodon's joined Leeds permanently. Troy Parrott has joined AZ Alkmaar for a decent fee. Eric Dyer, of course, is now at Man United, at Bayern Munich, I should say, sorry. So they did have an oversized squad last year. I think it was 29 players used in the Premier League. That has dropped down heavily. And I think they've made some really attractive incomings as well. Obviously, I'll get on to Dom Solanke in due course. But I think the signings of Archie Gray and Bergvall in midfield as well, two really, really promising, quality, potentially, top of the league midfielders in maybe 3-4 years' time. I do think they are that good. And we've seen already Bergvall have a crucial, performance against Bayern Munich. I know it's only a pre-season friendly, but with an amazing assist for Kulusevski, that takes the weight off James Maddison. James Maddison's injury record's not particularly good over the last few years. Bergvall can come in. He's not going to probably have the same goal and assist tally instantly, but that's really, really impressive. Archie Gray can play at right back, but he's obviously a midfielder that can play as an 8, as a 6. That gives them more flexibility there. I wouldn't be surprised if someone like Oliver Skipp still left the club as well. So Højbjerg, Skipp and Ndombele left the club. Archie Gray, Bergvall, and maybe they'll enter their hat once again for Conor Gallagher as well, who's moved to Atletico Madrid. Seems like it's not quite secured as well. But let's talk about Dominic Solanke, because they needed to do something in this area of the pitch. They didn't replace Kane with an out-and-out number 9 last year. Richarlison was still at the club. They brought in Brennan Johnson, who can play centrally but has been mainly used off the right-hand side, of course. Dominic Solanke, £55 million, rising to 65. I really like this signing. I think last year in Europe's top 5 leagues, he was 10th for shots. He was getting amazing opportunities. His shot conversion rate was not particularly impressive, but still 19 league goals for a Bournemouth side that no one expected that much of before a ball was kicked, under new management in Andoni Iraola. I think that was an excellent season from Solanke, to be totally honest. My concern with him, I think he's got a brilliant injury record, showed a lot of quality last year, was slightly unlucky to miss out on the Euro squad. It was a toss-up between him and Ivan Toney. Ivan Toney probably felt like the right call, given he's a more similar player to Harry Kane and has got that penalty record as well. But Dom Solanke's only really had one exceptional year in the Premier League. Previously for Bournemouth, it's been in the Championship where he really re-established himself after a difficult spell when he initially joined the club, and obviously he had a difficult time at Liverpool. He was competing with Bobby Firmino at that time. That was really difficult to get game time. But for all that promise that he showed at Chelsea, where he was one of the most exciting strikers to ever come out of their academy, at least in that 10-year period, he's now found his feet again at Bournemouth, got to move to a big club in Spurs, and it feels like the right sort of club for him. You know, you were looking around the striker market this late in the window, felt like him or Ivan Toney were probably the outstanding options. Maybe someone like Santiago Jimenez from Feyenoord, but was he necessarily a nailed-on success in the Premier League? That was a slight risk. Jonathan David's still on the table as well, but there must be a reason that maybe a top club hasn't gone for him just yet. So I think Dominic Solanke was a good pickup. And Ange has sort of hinted the fact there could be more signings to come as well. In terms of what they need, I think behind Dragoshin as their third choice centre-back, they're still pretty light at centre-back. Ashley Phillips is their fourth choice. There's talk about him going to Getafe on loan. Ben Davies is their fifth choice. That's not ideal. And we saw what happened to their season last year when Romero and Van der Ven were out at the same time. So I'd potentially look at another centre-back for sure. And then a backup left-back as well. Ben Davies has been an amazing servant. But Sergio Reguilon doesn't have a future at Spurs, and Destiny Udogie is out injured at the moment. So that's already putting stress on that left-back position as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a centre-back come in. I mean, Mikey, do you agree with me that this is maybe not the best transfer window out of all the Premier League clubs, but this is a pretty impressive one?
I think it's certainly a very promising one. I guess my only hang-up would be that, you know, from say the perspective of a Spurs fan, how many of these players are definitely going to make a big difference this season? And I think Solanke's probably the only one, at least out of him, Gray and Bergvall, who definitely will start, right? I think Archie Gray is definitely ready for the Premier League. Obviously, massively precocious talent, but that midfield is already quite stacked. You could say the same about Bergvall, and you do wonder whether, you know, maybe a more like-for-like backup with Maddison might have been good in this window. Maybe that would have been pushing things too far, but I think there's going to be pressure on Spurs this season. I think they kind of have to, you know, usurp Aston Villa here and get that fourth spot. I think I could even see them finishing third if Liverpool, you know, struggle at any point under Arne Slot. I think they're good enough. I think, you know, clearly Ange Postecoglou is a good enough manager to challenge in that sense. But I think it has been promising. But I just think that there maybe could have been a bit more instant first team upgrades in there. I think Solanke is really good. I think that it is a lot of money to spend on someone who, you know, has yet to prove himself at a Champions League level club. But I think even like last season, you know, I wouldn't say that was his only impressive season in the Prem. I think the season before, actually, at least after, you know, under O'Neill, he looked, not necessarily in terms of his goal scoring form, but just as an all-round footballer, looked so good on a consistent basis for Bournemouth. So I do think, even if Solanke doesn't, you know, top, what was it, 17 goals was it that he got 19 goals. Even if he gets that, that's fine. But even if he doesn't match that, even if he was only to get 15 goals, I feel like the difference that he should make to that forward line should mean that someone like Heung-min Son still, you know, can still sustain a really good goal scoring level. Maybe even James Maddison gets involved with the goals a little bit more. I feel like his all-round play should really suit that Spurs team. So yeah, I'm really positive about it. But I feel like, I think Ange will probably come under a bit of pressure this season. You know, we saw what happened like the end of last season. You know, they started so well, and then because they kind of reverted to the norm towards the end of the season, even though they were in and around a position where Spurs fans would have absolutely taken it, like he came under an unnecessary amount of pressure. So that's the only thing that I worry with Spurs this season. But I think in terms of future-proofing that team, like Bergvall and Gray, those signings are absolutely immense.
There we have it, guys. Before we move on to our Sky Mobile Switch of the Week, Nieve, let's have a discussion of these three. Who are you ranking as the winners of the window so far?
Tottenham by far last in that. Like by
You're not a
far,
fan?
comfortably. Yeah, honestly, I'm totally in disagreement that I even think it's been a particularly good window.
You've got to dive into this, Nieve.
Shot down, Diggs.
No, I know. I've been told. What's your thoughts on that?
We're just word of like, you know, this potentially making them the third best team in the country, or, you know, that I've seen a lot of online. It's confusing me. It's really confusing me because, Solanke, I think Andrew's brought him in for, I think mostly actually, I think off the ball, the way Solanke is as well and how he'll press, and also just someone to alleviate a bit of something from Son, because it did feel like it was all on Son. But time will tell whether or not that signing actually makes that happen. I just feel like Tottenham are going into this season with a bit of a chaotic setup with that squad. There's plenty of positions where they've got lots of players, but just because you've got lots of players, does that mean you've got good depth? I don't think so. And sort of midfield and defensively, I think they're 1 or 2 inches away from it going horribly wrong, especially with a style that Ange plays that can make you super vulnerable.
Fair enough. Yeah, I would say actually if Basuma gets injured, they don't really have a natural 6 to replace him. I mean, Archie Gray could play there, but that is a big ask. And then I did mention their centre-back depth I still don't think is quite perfect, but there we have it. So you're going West Ham number 1, then Man United, then a distant Spurs.
Yeah.
Mikey?
Spurs of it. I think... Yeah, it's really hard to argue with West Ham, I think. Not necessarily, like, it's not that necessarily this will translate to West Ham, you know, finishing harder than they did last season. It might not. Like, West Ham might actually end up being quite a difficult first season for Lopetegui, because there's lots of expectation, lots of new players in the squad, you know, lots of outgoings last year as well. So, you know, there will be a balance there in terms of, like, actually, you know, how will players settle? You know, Paquetá's situation, of course, you know, away from the field has been, you know, up and down over the last year as well. So it's not to say that, you know, West Ham are suddenly going to actually like be a big success here. But I think I don't know, pretty much all of those signings seem pretty smart. Like, or they're either, you know, they seem like a good fit or they were pretty cheap. Like I think the Kilman signing, given that he's worked under Lopetegui at Wolves as well, and it is quite versatile. I think that's really, I think that is quite inspired. So yeah, I think you have to give it to West Ham, and I would probably say the same. I think another team who we haven't mentioned in this video as well, who should be up there too, is Brighton. Like I do feel like Brighton could improve. I think even with Pascal Gross, yeah, because you know you're under a new manager. I think they were over reliant on Pascal Gross for a long time. Again, like, will Brighton finish in the top 8 this season? I don't expect that they will, but I think the Mats Vifa signing, I think, does, you know, alleviate, you know, some of the you know, the hole that Pascal Gross is leaving. I think he's a really, really top talent. I think Minte on the right hand side, you know, suddenly they've got so much depth there. And, you know, I was speaking about Simon Adingra a couple of weeks ago as a potential option for Liverpool. There are rumours about Arsenal potentially looking at him as a Bukayo Saka backup as well. Like, I mean, if he is sold, then they're already sorted there anyway. But if he stays, then they've got amazing depth in the forward line in that sense. And the price that they got for Undav from Stuttgart, also brilliant. I think they've made over 3 times the amount that they spent on him. So yeah, I think they've also had a really good window. So I would put them, I don't know, I'd put them 3rd or 4th somewhere anyway. So, but,
a late entry for Brighton. There we have it, guys. Let's move on to our Sky Mobile Switch of the Week. These are our favourite completed transfers from the last week. Nieve, what's your favourite completed move?
Yeah, so we've talked about him already quite a lot, Ligt, as a sign-in, just purely on, like, wow, to bring in a player like that, to make that happen. I'm really impressed by that, really impressed. And all of a sudden you're in a situation where United have been so unfortunate with injuries to the centre-backs, but now the domino effect of that. And in terms of, you know, if there is an injury to Leny, Yoro, right now it's obviously Alessandro Martinez and Ligt, but if there's an injury there, your next centre-back, you know, you then step down to like Maguire, then you step down to Lindelof. It's just that extra domino effect it has, so that for big chunks of the season, you're not relying on players that they were relying on last season, which was hugely detrimental to them. Like it, Mikey?
Yeah, I think I think Delicht's a great shout. I think I probably will go to West Ham actually. Jean-Clair Todibo, like that loan move from Nice, like absolutely brilliant. Like Nieve was saying, linked with Man United in the past. I think we were recommending him as a potential signing for Liverpool last year. Like, in terms of where he's at, like in his career, I think West Ham have got him at the perfect time. I think he's 24 years old now. but he's really been on the scene for so long. I remember when he was at Toulouse as an 18-year-old and, you know, like burst onto the scene in Ligue 1 and was like, you know, looked like the next big thing. Went to Barcelona and had a really difficult time there because, you know, they were still overly reliant on Gerard Piqué. I think Samuel Umtiti was still, you know, it was just around the time that he was starting to get those, you know, that awful bout of injuries, but they were still very stacked in that area, or at least they were certainly less trustful of youth than they are now. A very different era at Barcelona, and yeah, struggled to get game time, but has, you know, really worked his way back. He's had, you know, 3 seasons at Nice playing alongside Dante, who, you know, obviously, you know, such experience there to learn from. I think in his first season at Nice, he was playing alongside William Saliba. So this is a player who, you know, I don't know, has got an amazing experience for someone of his age, and yeah, you know, playing in his 3rd country now. So yeah, I think Todibo will bring a lot to West Ham, and yeah, if it goes well and they can make that move permanent, then they're absolutely laughing.
Love it. My suggestion is Fabio Carvalho's move to Brentford. Quite a substantial fee actually on this one, £22.5 million. I actually think it's a pretty good sale from Liverpool's perspective as well, given the fact he only cost £5 million from Fulham. He was loaned to RB Leipzig at the start of last season, didn't get a look in there. Goes to Hull for the second half of the season under Liam Rosenior and actually plays really well for Hull. But still, £22.5 million is a big outlay from Brentford, but this is a guy of immense promise. I think he wasn't going to get a look in at Liverpool with Szoboszlai and Harvey Elliott kind of filling those floating 10 roles. Alexis McAllister can of course play further forward, and Brentford did need to find goals from other areas as well. Ivan Toney's future's a little bit up in the air, even though the main links at the moment are with Saudi Arabia. I'd be surprised if he did this. But Brian Mbeumo doesn't have necessarily the best injury record. Johan Visser. It takes a little bit of the heat off them, and I hope it works out for him, because maybe he jumped to Liverpool a little too soon, and especially given the amount of youngsters they had in his position at that particular time. So I really hope it works out for him at Brentford. So those are our suggestions for our Sky Mobile Switch of the Week. Which one did you prefer though? Let us know in the comments. And guys, thank you so much for watching the Transfer Show for another week. Remember that with all the transfers going on this summer, it's never been easier to switch your network to Sky Mobile. All you need to do is text PAC, P-A-C, to 65705, 65705 that was, and Sky Mobile will do the rest. Massive thanks to Nieve and Mikey for joining me on this week's show, and we'll catch you next time. Bye bye.